Douglas Murray is on the line from London. Douglas, good morning.
Very good to be with you.
Thank you for your time. We're going to take 12,000 of these. What is the warning for us?
Well, the warning has to be that you better know what you're doing. You better know what the next stages are. All of our politicians in Europe in the last few years have seen there as being only brownie points to be got for being open-hearted, as they say, about refugees. Now they're realizing that there is actually a potential price for them to pay, and indeed a price for everybody to pay. It is very easy for politicians to be generous on behalf of other people. But it's quite a different thing being generous yourself, and it's quite a different thing being naive on behalf of other people. Because the only people who seem not to have thought through the consequences of the mass migration into Europe, and it's very important to remember that most of the people, by the European Union's own standing now, are not actually legitimate asylum seekers. The majority of them, the European Commission now admits, are actually simply economic migrants. But nobody apart from the people in power could not have foreseen that the mass movement of thousands of people is merely the beginning of a story, the very beginning of it, and that the way in which it rolls out will have utterly incalculable consequences for years to come.
Well, Merkel has taken 1 million of these. The German people are starting to wake up, aren't they? That's 1% of their 80 million population. Last year, Sweden, with a population of around 10 million, was taking up to 10,000 every week. And as you just said, these aren't asylum seekers, these are economic refugees. You see them on the television. They're young men from Africa and the Middle East.
Yes, and Chancellor Merkel is going to go down in the history books for this. This moment when effectively Europe's external borders went down, and of course one of the main aims of the European Union project was to also take down internal borders between European Union countries. So that's what allowed this to happen. Now somebody rather wittily said on, I think, Twitter at the time, that Chancellor Merkel reminded them of one of those girls you sometimes read about who in the news, whose parents have gone away for a weekend, and she's said on Facebook that she's got a spare house for a party, and of course the whole world descends, and the next thing you read is that she's had to call the police. That's exactly what Chancellor Merkel ended up doing. She opened the doors, she announced to the world that Europe's doors were open, and then suddenly panicked because the world was arriving. Too late, of course, too late. By the European Commission's own estimates, as I say, the majority of these people should not be here. That means that Germany, if you go by the European Commission's own estimates, which I think are very low, that means that Germany now has to deport almost 750,000 people who've arrived in the last year alone. The Swedish government is now trying to talk tough, having been so reprehensibly stupid in recent months. The Swedish government is now saying it's going to deport up to 80,000 people who shouldn't be there. Of course, we all know that's nonsense. Everybody knows that's nonsense. Everybody who is looking and wondering whether they'll come next year realizes this is nonsense.
And of course,
isn't going to deport those people. Germany isn't going to deport those people.
And of course, the people have only one redress, don't they? And that is to speak as they've spoken in Sweden. The Sweden Democrats, who are just a fringe party, as you say, derided by so many of their critics, have now surged ahead in the recent polls. I mean, you've got to see the rise of Donald Trump in America.
Yes.
You know, that is a consequence of this, isn't it?
Yes, when people complain that they don't like what's happening in the politics around this, they should simply realize that mainstream political parties and mainstream politicians have been failing the public time and again. And, you know, I have to point to your own country like every other country in this regard. You know, every single time a terrorist lets off a bomb or cuts somebody's head off and shouts Allahu Akbar, the Australian Prime Minister, the American President, the British Prime Minister tells everyone this has nothing to do with Islam, for instance. Everyone can see that it's only got to do with Islam. Otherwise, they wouldn't be saying Allahu Akbar. But this, like the migrant crisis, because it's so welded to it, what we're seeing is the result of an entire political class across the world that has refused to be honest with the public, refused to be honest with the public about Islamic extremism, refused to be honest with the public about the consequences of mass immigration. And you can't then blame the general public for going elsewhere for their leaders.
No, they're on a holiday from reality, as I've said many times, Douglas, a holiday from reality. I mean, Merkel said, listen, these are mainly young people. They could assist the greying German population by providing the labour force for the next generation. Never mind the labour force had no jobs to go to. We've got people here, thousands and thousands of them, homeless, unemployed. Now we're going to be asked to find homes and jobs for 12,000 whom we don't know.
Exactly. I mean, does anybody not see the long-term consequences of this? You know, the idea that, as I say, it's the very beginning of the process. As you rightly say, what jobs are they going to have? Where are they going to live? How are they going to be sustained? You know, I mean, my own view is that publics in countries like Australia, like Britain, are very generous to genuine asylum seekers.
Correct.
But our generosity is not without limit. And there are lots of things that by now our political leaders should be discussing. They should be discussing what temporary asylum means. Is it possible we could actually give some people asylum, but it's only until their country is put back together and then they go back. They don't stay here forever. They don't become Australian. They don't become British. It's a temporary arrangement. If the public had any confidence that was going to happen, I think people wouldn't mind allowing people in on a temporary a deal. But what we all know is that once you're into Australia, you stay. Once you're into Europe, you stay. And so we have no trust in our leaders.
See, this Douglas Murray, you've heard the voice. This is a young man. So people are saying, who is this fellow? He's a young man. And it's refreshing to hear young journalists speak like this. You wrote this, which I thought was quite magnificent. While the glow of moral effervescence may have briefly hung around those leaders who said refugees welcome, the story was bound to have a second act, and that was always due when the next turn of the wheel brought negative stories associated with the refugees. The concern from people here, Douglas, is we've signed on to all this.
Oh, yes, of course you have. We all have. And as I say, the one thing you can do to get out of it is to ask the questions now that people don't want to ask. You know, find out what system the Australian government has in place to vet the people coming in. I bet you will find, like the system that Europe pretends to have, that it is no system. After allowing in 1.3 million people, Chancellor Merkel suddenly said, when they realized that anti-Semitic incidents were going up in Germany, suddenly said, we don't want anti-Semites. Okay, Chancellor Merkel. Okay, Australian politicians. What is your policy? What is your infrastructure to vet the views of people who do come into Australia? What is your system to make sure that the people coming in are not anti-Semites? What is your system to make sure that the people coming in don't think that women in Australia are uncovered meat who can be molested at any stage that they want to? What is your view to make sure that the views of the people coming in do not go completely against the mainstream views of decent liberal, in the best sense of the term, Australian society? I bet you will find that the system doesn't exist.
That's it. Hasn't existed. Haven't even thought of it. And as you say, the same problems of impossible integration and impossible rage will continue to grow. You said, although there were neither homes nor jobs for the migrants to go to, letting them in turned out to be the easy part. The real problems are just starting.
Yes. And this is going to go on for years and years. The easiest stage in the world is to look like you're being generous. As I say, to be generous with other people's money, i.e. taxpayers' money, to pretend, as a lot of politicians in Britain did, that they were themselves going to take in Syrian families. Not one of the politicians who said that currently has a Syrian family living with them. Of course they don't. That is the easiest thing in the world to boast about. The hardest thing is what a country does with thousands of people arriving whose views we don't know, who there is no system in place to vet, That is the hard part, and that is one that is going to go on for all of our lifetimes and beyond.
And that's what you said. The citadel of political correctness, or generous humanitarian superpower, as Sweden likes to call itself, has been brought to earth by inescapable reality. It's very good to talk to you, Douglas Murray, and I really thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Look forward to it.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.